A young priestess joins the Adventurers Guild, where she's assigned the lowest rank of porcelain. She's approached by a group of novice adventurers of the same rank looking for a healer. They ask her for her help clearing out a nearby cave of goblins, which are typically considered low-level monsters. However, the party soon realizes that they've severely underestimated the creatures as they become trapped in a narrow passage by their cheap tricks and brute force tactics. The wizard gets outnumbered. The warrior discovers his sword is too long to fight in tight quarters, and the fighter is quickly overrun without backup. Priestess barely escapes the onslaught, dragging her wounded companion along. A couple of goblins catch up, and she's paralyzed by indecision. Is she strong enough to defend her friend, or should she run for her own life? Fortunately, a fully armored adventurer wielding a short sword and shield saves her from certain death. He calls himself Goblin Slayer. His cold decisiveness is exactly what's in order here. The wounded one is a lost cause, and it's time to kill some goblins. Priestess decides the only sensible thing to do is to stay with this guy and try to be useful. He shares some of his encyclopedic knowledge of goblin killing while clearing out the cave. They come upon a small room with a shaman. Priestess uses one of her miracles to blind it, while Goblin Slayer does his thing. They clear out the rest of the goblin nest and head back to the guild. The next time Goblin Slayer accepts a quest, Priestess walks into the guild wearing chainmail that he suggested she buy. She's ready to slay some goblins. One day, Goblin Slayer carries out his morning routine of checking the perimeter of the farm he lives on. Afterwards, he accompanies his childhood friend Cowgirl into town. She's got deliveries to make, and he's heading to the Adventurers Guild to find work. At the guild hall, Cowgirl overhears other adventurers crack jokes and talk behind his back about his low-quality armor and his tendency to only accept goblin-slaying quests, despite his silver rank. The woman who runs the counter, Guild Girl, responsible for doling out quests and rewards alike, appreciates his presence since he takes jobs nobody else wants. Priestess shows up, and he tests her goblin-slaying knowledge, while Cowgirl looks on, surprised he's questing with someone, let alone a young girl. They approach the counter and ask whether there are any quests involving goblins. There are, and he chooses to take on a goblin settlement in an old fortress. Priestess suggests they help an inexperienced party who accepted another goblin job, afraid they'll die. But Goblin Slayer refuses. Defeated, she tags along with him. Goblin Slayer divulges the reason for his fixation. When he was a child, goblins raided his village. His sister was killed as he watched from beneath the floorboards, powerless to save her. Cowgirl's parents also perished during the attack, which is why they now live on her uncle's farm. Traumatized, he had become obsessed with the wholesale extermination of goblins. Back home, Cowgirl's uncle warns her that Goblin Slayer might be a bit too obsessed. Later, Goblin Slayer and Priestess attack the goblin fortress, setting it alight. She uses her new miracle to cover the exits, preventing the goblins from escaping their fiery death. She's on board with the idea of killing all goblins, but wonders if they have to be so brutal about it. Meanwhile, in another city, a bard sings of the Goblin Slayer's exploits, catching the attention of some passing adventurers, who ask him where they can find the hero of his tale. A high elf archer, a dwarf shaman, and a lizard man priest walk into the Adventurers Guild, looking for someone they call Orkbolg. It takes a few minutes to sort out that they're referring to Goblin Slayer, whose name was lost in translation. And right on cue, he and Priestess waltz into the guild hall. The trio implores him to hear them out. He tells an eager Priestess to wait downstairs for him. She's joined by Witch, who claims to be an acquaintance of Goblin Slayer. She understands the Priestess' decision to pass up partying with other rookies in favor of her new mentor, though warns her to be wary all the same, and to remember that she is her own person. Upstairs, the trio explains their mission to fight back against the Demon Lord, who's raising an army after recently being resurrected, but Goblin Slayer cuts them off. If there are no goblins, he doesn't give a flying. Fortunately, goblin activity is ramping up, which is why they sought him out. The little green buggers are the army's cannon fodder, and as soon as they mention this, he accepts the job and is ready to get underway. Back downstairs, Priestess asks him about the job, but Goblin Slayer tells her not to come. Annoyed with his inability to gauge anything on a social level, she calls him out for not even talking to her before making an executive decision. With or without his invitation, she accompanies him. That night, the five of them set up camp and discuss why they became adventurers. They tell stories they've heard about where goblins originally came from. Goblin Slayer regales them with the tale his sister told him, claiming the little ankle biters came from the Green Moon. The party reaches the goblin nest. After dealing with the guards out front, Goblin Slayer confirms the kills and starts covering himself in their blood, telling the others to do the same to mask their scent. They enter the underground structure and eventually come to a fork in the path. The dwarf notes the tracks indicate their hideout is to the left, but Goblin Slayer leads them on to the right, where they find and rescue an elven prisoner. They vow to avenge her and wipe out every last goblin. Back the way they came and onward down the left corridor, it opens into a large circular hall with sleeping goblins littering the floor. To avoid raising an alarm, they cast sleeping spells and begin exterminating the goblins quietly. The sound of heavy footsteps fills the hall, and an ogre appears in the doorway. When Goblin Slayer realizes it's not a goblin, he loses interest, which only serves to infuriate the already bloodthirsty beast. Priestess quickly casts protection to counter the ogre's fireball, saving the entire party. They jump into action and begin their assault, but the ogre proves a formidable foe. Priestess helps Goblin Slayer recover from being swatted away like an insect, so he can activate his trump card. He pulls a scroll from his bag, and in a flash, the ogre is severed limbless, and seawater covers the floor. The gate scroll he used was linked to the bottom of the ocean, which unleashed water under immense pressure when opened up to the world above sea level. Reinforcements arrive, and the group heads back to town. The archer complains that adventuring should be fun, and this was anything but. She expresses her desire to one day take them on a proper one. A few days later, Goblin Slayer and Cowgirl head into town to sell her uncle's produce. The elf, dwarf, and lizard man run into him and float the idea of checking out some more ruins, which he says he'll think about to their surprise. Meanwhile, two rookie adventurers search for a new weapon after losing their only sword in the sewers. In the guild hall, which gives them a candle that burns hotter the closer you get to whatever you seek. Goblin Slayer drops off some gear at the blacksmith for repairs. He's also looking for a new scroll to replace the one he used against the ogre. The blacksmith promises to keep his eyes open, but doubts he'll come across one anytime soon. At the guild, the two rookies ask for advice. Guild Girl suggests asking Goblin Slayer. They have no money to buy anything, so he tells them it should be easy enough to get their hands on a club, at least until they recover their sword. Before he can leave, which he wants to do given there are no goblin quests at the moment, Guild Girl asks a favor of him. She's short-staffed and wants him to sit in as an observer while she conducts a promotion exam. Now, during the exam, she calls out the scout under evaluation for being perhaps a little too well-equipped for his experience. He tries to explain himself, but the other examiner quickly sees through his lies with a spell. He's a low-down, dirty thief is what he is. The scout backpedals and tries to get Goblin Slayer on his side, but no dice. Frustrated, he briefly thinks about attacking Guild Girl, but decides against it, fearing the wrath of Orkbolg, and he's forced to accept the consequences. Elsewhere, the two rookies, equipped with a club and candle, fight their way through the giant insects that infest the sewers, and they get the sword back from the belly of the insect that ate the rat that the sword was stuck in. While the other examiner teases Guild Girl about her crush on Goblin Slayer, he suddenly bursts back into the office with a request specifically for his services from Sword Maiden, a former adventurer turned hero after defeating the Demon Lord 10 years prior. Goblin Slayer announces that he's going to Watertown, and whoever wants to join him is welcome. The group chews him out on his lack of interpersonal skills and inability to consider others when making decisions. And they have a few conditions. The girls would like him to reduce the extreme brutality of his approach and make him promise not to use fire, water torture, or poison this time. When the party arrives, they head to the Temple of Law. Priestess starts to wonder about who exactly it was that summoned him, only to be dumbfounded when Goblin Slayer casually mentions their employer is the Archbishop of the Supreme God, the Sword Maiden. As soon as they meet her, the first thing out of his mouth is, "I'm here for the goblins." Priestess is mortified at his poor manners and stumbles through a somewhat more formal but fangirlish introduction. Apparently, with increasing frequency, bodies have been found in the streets showing signs of violence, as bodies found on the streets often do. In time, the city's guards thwarted an assault in progress and discovered that the assailant was a goblin, which is why Sword Maiden sent the request. She believes they've set up shop underground in the extensive sewer system the city is built on. She gives the party a map and they set off to investigate. Searching the sewers, they run into multiple groups of the little creatures. While crossing a bridge, they're attacked by a literal boatload of goblins. The dwarf uses magic to sink the boat with a large boulder. But the surprises keep coming when a giant alligator appears in the water. Using this to their advantage, Priestess casts a miracle that causes its tail to glow, attracting the rest of the goblin fleet to it. And they casually watch and chat as the alligator does the goblin killing for them. Goblin Slayer figures that someone must have shown the goblins how to use the boats, and since they seemed unaware of the alligator, it's likely they were sent there on purpose. Back in town, Priestess enjoys a hot bath and is joined by Sword Maiden. She advises the young adventurer not to completely rely on her new mentor. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer checks the job board and finds it odd that none of them involve clearing out giant rats, which usually infest sewer systems. He decides to purchase a canary to detect poison gas used in old traps that could still be functional in the ruins below the city. Back down below, they reach a point where their maps are no longer useful and continue on until they come upon a large door. The archer examines it. It isn't locked and she doesn't detect any traps. They decide to check it out. Upon entering the room, they see what looks like a prisoner, but quickly discover it's a trick. The door slams behind them and the room begins filling with poisonous gas. They quickly seal the vents and prepare for an ambush. After a moment of silence, goblins begin pouring through the only door. Goblin Slayer can't help himself and leaves the protection of Priestess Barrier to engage the creatures directly. It turns out they're being led by a champion, a giant variant of goblin, who surprises Goblin Slayer with a devastating blow of his club. Priestess, overwhelmed with concern for Goblin Slayer's condition, and rightfully so, loses focus and the protective barrier disappears. The Goblin Champion targets the terrified Priestess, taking a chunk out of her shoulder with his teeth. The rest of the group is overwhelmed. It's all starting to look like the tragic noob excursion from episode 1, until the Priestess' screams remind Goblin Slayer of his sister's fate. Refusing to watch helplessly, he musters the strength to get back up. His eye glows red. Fueled with rage, he uses the hair from the prisoner decoy as a garrote to choke the giant goblin before ripping its eye out. This display causes the rest of the goblins to flee in terror. He then goes to check on Priestess, and after exchanging few words, succumbs to his wounds and passes out. A young Goblin Slayer is berated by his master, a small goblin-like creature who challenges him with a series of riddles. Giant icicles loom overhead, waiting to crush him if he answers incorrectly. After 2 right answers, his master hits him with a "What am I carrying in my pocket?" But the scene cuts away before we get to hear how he responds or see what happens to him. A very adult Goblin Slayer wakes up in the Sword Maiden's bed beside Priestess. Obviously, resurrection miracles require sleeping next to a virgin, for all the healing properties that accompany chastity. The rest of the party is glad to see him awake, and they all go out for a meal. Later, Goblin Slayer and Priestess head into town to run some errands and get their gear fixed, while the others continue scouting the sewers. After discovering the marvel of ice cream, Witch and Spearman from their hometown Adventurers Guild show up with a delivery for Goblin Slayer. Back in the sewers, the others lead them to behold their latest discovery, a giant floating eye monster guarding a room. The casting abilities of the creature make facing it in battle a less than desirable idea. Luckily, Goblin Slayer's package is perfect for clearing a room. The party creates an opening for him, and he fills the air in the room with a cloud of finely ground flour. They clear out before he ignites the powder, which makes quick work of the creature. After the dust settles, they discover a strange mirror, the only thing worth guarding in the otherwise empty space. After Priestess touches the mirror, the image of their reflection shifts to reveal a scene of goblins working with tools in some other place. The party recognizes the same type of boat from the other day in the background. The mirror must be a portal, which explains where the goblins are coming from. The explosion alerted the other goblins in the ruins, who rush towards their location. The party hunkers down and sets up defenses in preparation for the coming battle. The lizard works on removing the mirror from the wall, while the others engage the swarms of goblins. Goblin Slayer directs the lizard man to orient the mirror towards the ceiling after it comes free, and they all take cover underneath. He tells Priestess to cast holy light to distract them, while the dwarf brings the ceiling down around them. The mirror protects the group from the falling debris that simply passes through to the other side of the portal, probably killing more goblins. Back at the Temple of Law, Goblin Slayer accuses Sword Maiden of knowing way more than she let on. The bodies found in the streets weren't the ankle-biters' MO, so someone must have staged them, intent on raising concerns about goblins in the city. She admits the alligator is actually her familiar and explains that the mirror was left by a cult years prior. She also delayed taking action to rid the city of the pests, just to prove how destructive the little buggers can be due to her own trauma. She offers him the mirror, but is disappointed to hear that they already encased the rare relic in concrete and sank it to the bottom of the lake. He empathizes with her experience, suffering at the hands of the green menaces, but he cannot offer her the salvation she seeks. But if she ever needs him and goblins are involved in any way, shape, or form, he'll be there. With their work in Watertown done, the party makes their way back. Goblin Slayer plans to unravel the mystery of ice cream. He reminisces about his sister cooking his favorite meal the night she died, but is disheartened that it's been so long that he can't even remember what it tastes like. After breakfast on the farm, he accompanies Cowgirl into town to get his armor repaired. At the guild, without his gear on, Spearman doesn't recognize him and chats with him like he's new in town, much to Guild Girl and Witch's amusement, who may or may not have some idea that he is who he is. After dropping off his damaged armor and retrieving his spare identical suit of armor, he runs into Priestess at the guild. Guild Girl also approaches him with the letter that arrived from Watertown. The rest of the party shows up, and they insist that they all go out for lunch, extending the invite to Guild Girl and Cowgirl, who popped in just in time to be included. While they eat, Guild Girl substantiates the rumors of Hero defeating the Demon Lord. Many cities are holding celebrations. There aren't any large celebrations in their town, but the Harvest Festival is coming up. She goes on to detail a new program for retired adventurers to train rookies, and the girls encourage Goblin Slayer to be a little less reckless so he'll have a chance at making it to retirement. On their way home, Cowgirl remarks on how nice his new friends are, though he's still pretty oblivious. Are they? On the farm, Cowgirl finds Goblin Slayer wondering about his future, which is encouraging, but she wonders whether he'll ever choose to stop doing what he does, or what he would do if he did. The following morning, Goblin Slayer makes his rounds, only to discover a concerning number of little footprints at the perimeter, vindicating his paranoia. But this is one of those situations where it sucks to be right. He tells Cowgirl to run, figuring the horde numbers over 100 and will likely attack soon, real soon, like tonight. But he's not running. So she refuses to leave, despite the fact that he's admitted he's no match for 100 goblins out in the open. He makes his way to the guild, where he pleads for the other members' help. Everyone still thinks goblins are a joke, but he insists there must be a goblin lord leading such a large raiding party. Spearman lectures him on just how adventuring works. They're not running a charity. Without a reward, there's no incentive to do anything, especially with Goblin Slayer's usual demeanor and general attitude towards the other members. And their general attitude towards him is also made plain. Guild Girl overhears everything and, moved by this plea from a man who never asks or expects anything from anyone, ducks away to try to do something within her power. Responding to Spearman, Goblin Slayer offers anything and everything he owns, even the clothes off his back. It begins to sink in how serious and desperate he really is. Spearman agrees to help for a good, strong drink. Of course, the rest of Goblin Slayer's party agrees to tag along. And Witch is also game. Guild Girl excitedly returns and announces a 1 gold coin reward per goblin head, which turns the tide, and more agree to join the fight. In preparation, Goblin Slayer devises a strategy, impressing past detractors and clearing any doubts about his silver rank. Back on the farm, the raid begins, and the adventurers follow his instructions, the first step of which is to rescue the captives being used as human shields. With that accomplished, they quickly dispatch the first wave. The next wave consists of goblins riding on the backs of wolves, just as Goblin Slayer predicted. The defenders erect a spear wall to use their vertical mobility against them. After losing their initial forces, the Goblin Lord sends in hobgoblins and goblin champions, but he's under no illusions about how things are going and runs off back towards his nest. But before he can get very far, Goblin Slayer, who knows only too well the mind of a goblin, is there to head him off, his eye glowing red. He taunts the Goblin Lord, revealing that the defenders back at the farm were a distraction while he cleared out the nest. The Goblin Lord has no place to escape to. On the farm, the adventurers continue to fight the dwindling remainder of the goblin forces. Even seasoned fighters are surprised by the giant variants due to their general dismissiveness and overall ignorance regarding goblins. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer gets knocked around by the Goblin Lord. The creature believes its victory is solidified, only to watch it crumble a moment later as Priestess emerges from the trees. She casts a miracle of protection, twice, creating two barriers that effectively sandwich the confused goblin. It desperately attempts to garner her sympathy. Unfortunately for him, Goblin Slayer, as his name implies, has no mercy for his kind. The hero and her two companions return after defeating the Demon Lord and wonder why the town is so empty despite celebrations across the land. Back at the guild, the adventurers toast to victory after a long night of goblin slaying. Priestess nods off, leaning against Goblin Slayer, and he slips the 1 gold coin reward for killing the Goblin Lord into her hand. He then opens up to Cowgirl, if only a little. When the sleepy priestess wakes up, she sees the gold coin in her hand, and he tells her that she earned it. She asks why he didn't post his plea as a job in the first place. Still haunted by his past, he was afraid that no one would respond since everyone ignored the raid that killed his sister. As a favor for helping, even after the gold coin, she asks if he would remove his helmet, since last time, embarrassed by the circumstances, she kept her eyes averted. He does, and the whole guild starts losing it seeing his face for the first time. Many end up on the wrong side of their bets as to what lay beneath the ever-present metal grate that obscures his features. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.